Hey everyone, Hashi here, and oh, yep. Oh, no, so many people have already covered this.
Hello again, Hashi here, and today I'm here to talk about an effect that's been widely used in movies. We'll call it the turn to dust effect. Even before this effect became a popular meme this summer, we'd seen it before.
Revenge is not an idea we promote on my planet.
Oh, well, that's good.
But you should have gone for the head.
In addition, many people have covered this as an After Effects tutorial, and they pretty much all did it the same way that I'm gonna do it. Can you guess how?
In particular.
In particular.
In particular?
In particular?
In particular?
Why in particular?
Well, because basically it's the best particle generator for After Effects out there. My goal today is to enable you guys by creating a template that's a snap to use. Now, I suppose I should say mild spoilers ahead, but I won't. Instead, I'm going to give away this template to you guys. It's called Dustify, and here's how it works. You get a background and a foreground element, and throw them in these comps. Then, go to this comp, and adjust these two markers to set the beginning and end of the disintegration. Lastly, position this guide marker to wherever you want the center of the effect to be. In our Trapcode Particular version, you even have control over the wind direction and speed. You can download that template right now, it's really easy to use. There's a 100% After Effects version, and a superior version using Trapcode Particular. Now, I won't always attempt to do effects both ways, but trying is often a bit of a fun exercise, and knowing the fundamentals instead of just the cheats is really important in any field. I mean, imagine if you always took the easy way out.
I want them alive. No disintegrations.
Oh, what a mess.
Today I'm going to give you an overview of how pretty much all disintegration style effects work. And then I'm going to show you some really cool things you can try in After Effects to improve your workflow. Since I've already created the template for you, I'm not going to do a step-by-step tutorial. The following is more of a breakdown of each of the components of the effect and how I simplified them into this template. Whatever level of experience you have in After Effects, I believe you'll learn something new. And I hope to encourage a mindset that helps you on future projects. And before we begin, a very special thanks to Rode, who provided me with some new amazing microphones. So say goodbye to this thing. And hello to much better sound in these episodes. I also want to point out up front that I'm using Video Copilot's FX console throughout all of my tutorials. It's the thing that looks like this. You can download a free copy, and it's a quick way to access your plugins and presets while you work. So let's get started. First, let's do a quick breakdown of a disintegration effect. It's really very simple. You've got a background and your victim. You need to fade away the person using some kind of spreading shape. You could use masks too if you prefer. You roughen the edge of that shape and add some turbulent displace, and it's classy now. Now we need particles to appear along the edge of this fade out so it looks like it's breaking up. The particle generator needs to basically be this strip, and the particles need to be colored like the original source. Once you turn up your particle count like crazy and add some turbulence to it, you've got yourself a nice little effect. This is what most existing tutorials will tell you to do, and it's basically what I did, with a couple extras. I remember there being these ashy cloth bits that flaked away from the characters in the movie, and also the characters turned kind of pale before crumbling. So I tried to add an element for each of those in my layer stack. That's all there is to it, really. I'll go over all the stuff in more detail in a bit. But if you check off everything on that list, you can basically create each of these pieces individually if you like, copying keyframes over and doing some fine tuning, and then when you get a new shot, you basically repeat the whole process. But what if I wanted to do a lot of these? What if the movie I was working on needed me to do the effect on, say, like half the entire cast? One of my jobs when I work for studios is creating After Effects templates, or workflows that reduce the amount of busy work needed wherever possible. This kind of thinking led me to developing this Dustify template. I thought of the fewest controls you'd really need in an Infinity War style disintegration, and tried to roll them all into just one layer. And for that, I'm going to need an ally. Expressions. After all, I believe it was Albert Einstein who once said, "Those who do not remember their expressions are doomed to use like way too many keyframes." In fact, the template you can download has no keyframes.
But how?
Well, I'll tell you, Cap. I utilized some amazing effects and expressions to eliminate the use of keyframes. So, if you'll bear with me, I promise the result is worth it. Most After Effects users are at least a little familiar with expressions, like throwing a wiggle expression on a position, etc. If you've never used expressions in After Effects, an expression is basically a little bit of code that tells any given property of a layer to do something. You find the stopwatch on any keyframeable property, hold Alt on a PC or Option on a Mac, and click. This opens a little box where you can type things like wiggle. You can click and drag the pick whip spiral to another property in this comp, or any other comp for that matter. There's also a quick menu of some useful expression starters here. If you really have no idea what I'm talking about at all, please visit Dan Ebbert's amazing website, motionscript.com, and click on the Expressioneer's design guide. It's been around for like 14 years, and it's still a super valuable resource to this day. One of the coolest new expressions I learned on this project was this one. It allows you to use two markers as basically stand-ins for keyframes. The nice thing about this is that markers are always top level and easy to adjust. When you've got a lot going on, it's really nice to just be able to click and grab something instead of digging into your layers to find all the little bits that you changed. So let me show you a quick example of that expression. Let's say I have this ball and two markers. I could write this expression on the opacity. Now if you watch, the opacity of the ball goes from 0 to 100 exactly between those two markers. Now let me break that down. The first two lines define some variables. This tells After Effects that start marker is shorthand for what time this comp's marker number 1 is set at. And the next line says the same, but for the end marker, marker number 2. The last line is an interpolation expression. It says that we're going to look at the property of time, starting here and ending here, and transforming that into a value between 0 and 100. Linear means that it'll be an even one-to-one relationship from start to finish. There are other kinds of interpolation, like ease in, ease out, similar to what you'd expect from ease keyframes. It may not be obvious why this is any more helpful than just adding two keyframes and adjusting them if you need to, but hang on, we'll get there. What if instead of opacity, I wanted the markers to control the scale of the ball? Well, I could do that like this. It's the same expressioning as before, only this time I have an interpolation for X and for Y, because scale is a two-part property. Now I've got this ball that grows, and if you want to retime it, I can just adjust the markers. You get the idea. Now let me clear everything out and start a new example. Say we had that ball and two markers like before. And say I wanted to create a new shape that bleeds out from the center of the ball to fill the whole screen. Sounds like we need a layer that's a shape, so we should probably use a shape layer. If I deselect everything and double click up here on the ellipse tool, you'll automatically create a shape layer filled with an ellipse. I'm sure you've done this by mistake, as I have many, many times, but this time I actually want it around. I'll drag it under this ball for now. Next, select this layer and the ball layer, and press P to reveal their position. I'll alt-click on the shape layer's position, and then pick whip it to the position of the ball. Now, where the ball goes, the ellipse goes. I open up the shape layer's contents, and go to ellipse 1, ellipse path 1, and it's got a size property here. I'm going to replace that with that expression from before. Now I'm going to make a few modifications. I'll replace the linear interpolations with ease. And since we're talking about pixel measurements, not percentages, I'll set the end limit of X to be 4,000 and the end Y limit to be 3,000. Now watch. I picked those numbers because they're nice, round, and slightly larger than twice the dimensions of an HD frame. That means that from most positions of the ball, the screen will still get filled as the ellipse grows. You can really set them to whatever you want, honestly. Now let's look again somewhere in the middle of this animation and add a turbulent displace to our shape. Again, a reminder that I'm using FX Console to pull up effects like that. Even the default values on turbulent displace create a really cool bleed pattern. Messing with the turbulent displace settings can be really fun and give you some awesome organic shapes. Now watch as I drag the ball around, or adjust the markers. I'm only interacting with one layer, but this blob is pretty fantastic, and I can iterate at light speed if I want to try a different speed or location, and I love when things like this can happen inside the After Effects window. Now I'm going to speed up a bit and talk about how I turned this into this. Down inside the shape layer properties are a fill color and a stroke color. I can change the fill to black and turn up the stroke width. And now I have this cool thing. This base shape layer can act as an alpha source for the whole shape, or I can use a luma source to grab that leading edge we'll need for the particle generator. For example, I can create a solid, then apply the Set Matte effect, and source this shape layer's alpha to get this, or the luminance to get this. Then I apply a combo of Reptile and Roughen Edges to make this shape a little more organic and interesting. You'll recall in our last episode we discussed how Reptile solves screen edge issues by unfolding the layer a few hundred pixels before eroding it. And just so you know, one of the reasons I'm using a solid now instead of the shape layer is that Reptile doesn't really work on a shape layer. Mixing and matching a few different effects like this, I created a few different mattes on a couple of different solids. I named them for reference and placed them down at the bottom of my comp. Then I hit them. Now when I bring in things like my background and foreground element, I had all these layers down at the bottom that I could reference in the Set Matte effect. The Set Matte effect is similar to using a layer above as a matte for your layer, but it allows you to pick any layer in the stack, and it doesn't require you having multiple copies of a matte layer, and things don't get all messed up if you accidentally mess with the layer order. So now that I have all these mattes in my back pocket, I can start putting together the effect. Here's me being eaten away by this layer. It's still all controlled by the ball's location. Since I have a couple of different mattes, one more eroded than the other, I can desaturate one copy of myself and create the effect of it looking a little bit pale or ashy at the edges. I add another copy of myself and use that white edge as the matte. And then I convert it to a 3D layer so Particular can use it as a layer emitter. So let's do that now. I'll add a solid, apply Trapcode Particular. I'll change the emitter type to layer, and then under layer emitter, I'll select the 3D foreground layer we just matted. I check Effects and Masks, and for layer sampling, you're going to want particle birth time. Then crank up the particle count. You can eyeball it, but I promise it's going to be a large number. Now at this point you might consider switching to half resolution, as these particle renders can get a little bit intense. In Particular 3, you always have the option of using the GPU acceleration to have some faster render times. I'm going to leave it off right now to make sure my screen recording doesn't crash. Anyway, cloudlet particles look pretty good for this effect, and I recommend you have the motion blur turned on. Make the particle size a little more random. Have the size fade out over life. And turning on the shadowlets will almost never disappoint. If we scroll down to Physics, Air, we can turn up the turbulence field, turn down the scale a bit, and get some great organic goodness in particle gathering. This is also where the wind settings are, and some wind is always nice. After this, I jumped into Trapcode's designer window. I duplicated the particle system, but with the count much lower, the particles set to bigger and way less opaque. These look a bit like puffy smoke, and smoke fades out in opacity over time and increases in size as it dissipates, so I'm adjusting the curves to match that. When I attempted my 100% After Effects version of this, I turned to After Effects' built-in particle system. I won't go into the details, but I ended up using 4 different instances of it with slightly different settings, and honestly never figured out exactly what I was doing. My 100% AE version did yield one thing that I really liked, however, so much so that I ported it over into the particular version as well, and that was some creative use of a good old-fashioned plugin called Shatter. Shatter's a cute little plugin that breaks a layer into many repeating shapes, and it has a keyframeable force that crumbles the layer away. I linked the Shatter force to the position of my controller, and then used some of those interpolation scripts to adjust the shatter radius between the 2 markers. At first it was a little hokey, but then I had the idea to use a fractal noise pattern to start eroding the whole image as the pieces shattered, creating the illusion of kind of crumbled bits. I also had a turbulent displace effect grow in intensity to simulate some air disturbance. This looked a lot to me like the shell of me getting broken apart, so I actually added a second instance of this behind, darkened and delayed it slightly, to create the illusion of there being a front and back surface coming apart. It's actually kind of cool. I played around with the order of these layers a bunch until I really liked the way they were combining. Again, it was really helpful to use that set matte option, so I could just arrange single layers at a time, instead of trying to keep the pairs together. In a dozen places I threw in more interpolation expressions onto layers, either to slowly change them from their original colors to more ashy, to increase the turbulent displace over time, and sometimes to choke away the matte of a layer, so by the end everything was eaten away. Obviously, instead of that bouncy ball, I created this little shape layer that stood in as my controller. Really, all the controller did at first was determine the start position of the effect. I thought about what would make this template more versatile, since I don't know what footage you'll use it on. You might have a different scale, you might want more or less wind, and in some particular direction. It'd be nice if you could set all those kind of values from one control layer, instead of digging into the many effects and layers below. Well, there's a great set of effects called Expression Controls. You may have used them before. They're basically empty sliders, point controls, angle dials, and a handful of other useful things you might need if you wanted to link multiple layers to one controller. For example, I could add a slider control and then link it to the wind speed in particular. In fact, what if I linked the rotation of the layer itself to the wind direction and added a little visual indicator on the wind direction as well? As I thought of more things like this I wanted to add to the controllers, sliders, bells, whistles, etc., I remember this awesome After Effects extension called the Pseudo Effect Maker. It's basically a really slick way to organize a bunch of different expression controls into one simple effect, which you can then apply to a layer like this one. It's super affordable, and the best part of this tool is that it allows you to set things like the default value, define minimum and maximum values, and also allows you to group together controllers like this, and basically create your own pseudo plugin. I roughed out and then started changing, modifying, and linking properties all over the comp to my controller layer, using pick whips, if-else expressions, and eventually I had this one nice effect I labeled Dustify Controls. I made it so the master scale and wind speed are right up front. Using the master scale would allow you to alter the scale of the particles and affect the size of some of the turbulence fields throughout. so you can nudge the particles a little bit bigger if your footage is a close-up or something. The wind amount is self-explanatory. As you turn it up, the wind speed gets faster. In the particular version, the angle of the wind is actually controlled by the rotation of the controller layer. In the 100% After Effects version, the quote wind direction is set automatically. You can increase the wind speed, but the controls are admittedly less accurate than with particular. Also, back in my Pseudo effect, you can explore the advanced controls where you can nudge the values of a couple of these elements until you get the look you like. And that's basically it. I didn't know how I was going to tackle this effect when I started. I tried a lot of things that didn't work, and I also had to look up a ton of info on expressions and things like that from people who know more than I do. You see, this show is also a learning process for me, because I've heard that once you stop learning, you start dying. I encourage everyone out there to be willing to try tackling a project that you don't know exactly how you're going to pull off. I also hope you enjoy using our template to disintegrate the thing of your choice. Please tweet some of your results at me at ActionMovieKid, and find the project files and a lot of other great resources at redgiant.com. Oh, hey, big guy.
I thought I killed you already.
Yeah, well, you know, all the rules are kind of out the window ever since you got your fancy new gloves, so right now I'm just taking everything with a grain of salt. Also, I'm sorry, could you really not have just doubled the resource? Oh, okay. Are those earth birds? They sound like earth birds.